You ever notice how the women who carry themselves with quiet strength don't have to beg for respect? It's not because they're louder or harder or trying to prove something. It's because they've learned a few unshakable rules about how they show up in relationships. And here's the thing: most people won't say out loud a man might love you, but love without respect will drain you. Respect is the ground the whole relationship stands on, and when you give it away too cheaply or bend your worth just to keep the peace, you end up feeling invisible. These rules aren't about controlling anyone else. They're about you protecting your dignity, your voice, and your value so that the respect you deserve naturally follows. When a man sees a woman live by them, he doesn't just notice, he can't forget it. Most of us walk into relationships wanting the same thing: to be seen, valued, and respected. But somewhere along the way, it gets complicated. You start giving more than you're receiving. You bite your tongue to avoid conflict. You sacrifice pieces of yourself just to hold the connection together. And when the respect you need isn't there, you feel it in your body before you even put it into words. The heaviness, the second guessing, the quiet ache of wondering if you're asking for too much. This is where so many people get stuck, thinking love alone will carry them through, when the truth is, love without respect will slowly wear you down. What I want to do is bring you back to yourself, to the rules that remind you of your value, that hold the ground steady under your feet, so respect stops being something you chase and becomes something you naturally attract. Respect in relationships is never just given, it's taught. Not with lectures or demands, but with the quiet consistency of what you allow and what you don't. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you excuse behavior that cuts you down, every time you absorb the weight of someone else's disrespect just to keep the peace, you're teaching them how to treat you. Not because you're weak, not because you don't know better, but because you care so deeply about the relationship that you're willing to carry more than your share. But here's the hard truth: what you tolerate doesn't just protect the other person's comfort, it erodes your own dignity. And over time, you start to feel invisible in a relationship where you should feel seen the most. This is why allowing certain patterns becomes so dangerous. Disrespect doesn't always look like yelling or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it's the small dismissals, the brushed off opinions, the jokes at your expense that you laugh off even though they sting. Sometimes it's being ignored when you express a need, or being made to feel like your feelings are too much. Each time you let those moments slide, you may think you're keeping the peace. But what you're really doing is sending the message that your respect isn't required here. And once that message is received, it shapes the entire tone of the relationship. Respect grows where boundaries are clear, and boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're lines that say, this is what I will and won't accept if you want to stay close to me. When you hold those lines, not with anger, but with calm consistency, people notice. They may not always like it at first, but they will understand it. And the ones who care about you, truly care, will adjust to meet you there. Because the truth is, men respect what a woman respects about herself. If you show up honoring your own worth, they have no choice but to respond to that. Think about how differently it feels when you show someone you won't argue for your value, you'll just live it. Instead of defending yourself over and over, you calmly step back when disrespect shows up. Instead of begging someone to listen, you stop explaining to ears that won't hear. Instead of proving your importance, you hold steady in knowing you already are important. That shift doesn't just change how you feel inside, it changes how others see you. The respect you deserve doesn't start with someone else finally waking up and treating you better. It starts with you deciding what you will no longer allow. That decision can be uncomfortable, even scary, because it risks conflict, it risks loss. But what it protects is far greater: your dignity, your peace, your sense of self. And the people who truly value you will rise to meet that standard. Those who don't, their distance is not your loss, it's your clarity. Respect isn't demanded, and it's never begged for. It's created by the standard you hold for yourself. And when you live by that, the respect you've been waiting for won't feel like a fight. It will feel like the natural response to who you are. Silence has a way of feeling like the safest option in relationships. When you've been dismissed, criticized, or met with defensiveness in the past, holding your tongue starts to feel easier than risking another argument. You tell yourself it's not worth the fight, that staying quiet will keep things calm, and in the moment, it does. Silence gives you a quick sense of control: no blow up, no rejection, no discomfort. But underneath that calm is a slow erosion of connection. Every time you silence your needs, your feelings, your truth, the distance between you and the person you love grows wider. The problem is silence doesn't just hide your words, it hides you. You disappear in a relationship where you long to be known. You start to feel lonely next to someone who shares your life because they don't really see your heart anymore. Not because they don't care, but because you've stopped letting them in. And what starts as self protection eventually turns into self abandonment. You think you're avoiding pain, but the ache of being unseen is its own kind of pain, and it lasts much longer. It's important to understand that silence, it isn't always chosen out of weakness, it's chosen out of experience. Maybe you grew up in a home where speaking up only made things worse. Maybe you've been in relationships where your words were twisted or where your emotions were used against you. Of course, you learned that silence was safer. It kept you out of the line of fire. That makes sense. But what once kept you safe is now keeping you stuck. Because in a healthy relationship, your voice isn't a weapon, it's a bridge. Without it, you can't build the intimacy you're craving. Think about how different it feels when you take the risk to speak calmly and clearly, even when your voice shakes. You're not trying to win an argument, you're inviting the other person to know you. You're saying, "This is what I feel, this is what matters to me." And when you do that, you give them the chance to meet you there. They may not always get it right, but at least they have the chance. Silence robs them of that chance, and it robs you of the closeness you're longing for. Breaking the pattern of silence doesn't mean speaking with anger or flooding the room with everything you've held back. It means learning to trust your own voice again, to remind yourself that your feelings are not too much, that your needs are not a burden. It's choosing to step into discomfort for the sake of honesty, because honesty is the only soil where real respect can grow. And yes, it feels risky, but every time you honor your truth with words instead of hiding it in silence, you strengthen the foundation of the relationship. Whether that means drawing you closer to the person you're with or giving you clarity about whether they can truly meet you. Silence may feel safe, but it costs you the very thing you want most: connection. And connection doesn't come from being perfect or agreeable, it comes from being known. And for that, your voice has to be in the room. One of the hardest balances in any relationship is learning how to hold a boundary without shutting your heart down. For so many people, the moment you draw a line, it feels like you're being harsh or unloving. You worry they'll think you don't care. You worry you'll come across as cold. So instead, you soften the edges of your boundary or drop it altogether just to keep the peace. But what ends up happening is you start living with resentment, smiling on the outside, but heavy on the inside. Because every time you betray your own needs to keep someone else comfortable, you lose a little piece of trust in yourself. A boundary is not a punishment. It's not about controlling the other person or proving a point. It's simply you saying, "This is what I need to stay healthy and present in this relationship." That's not selfish. That's responsible. But if you've been taught that love means sacrificing yourself, boundaries will feel like rejection. And if the person you're with has benefited from your lack of boundaries, they may treat it like rejection too. That's where the compassion comes in. Not compassion that excuses poor behavior, but compassion that understands the shift is uncomfortable for everyone at first. Think about it like this: compassion is the tone, boundaries are the content. You can hold a firm boundary with a soft tone. You can say no without raising your voice. You can express what you need without tearing the other person down. In fact, the clearer and calmer you are, the less room there is for defensiveness to take over the conversation. When someone hears, "I can't stay in this conversation when it turns into yelling, but I'd love to talk when we're both calmer," that's not rejection. That's an invitation to connect in a healthier way. The truth is, people respect what you consistently reinforce. If you cave every time someone pushes back, you teach them that your boundaries don't really mean anything. But if you stand steady without anger or cruelty, you're teaching them that your needs matter. Over time, that consistency builds trust, not just in the relationship, but in yourself. Because the more you see yourself follow through, the more you start to believe, "I can take care of me without losing my compassion for you." This is the shift that changes everything, realizing that boundaries and compassion are not opposites. They actually work together. Boundaries protect your energy, compassion keeps your heart open. Without boundaries, compassion turns into self-sacrifice. Without compassion, boundaries turn into walls. But when the two are paired, you get a relationship that has both safety and warmth. You get to be fully present without carrying silent resentment. And the other person gets to experience the real you, not the version that's shrinking to keep them happy. So if you've been afraid that drawing lines makes you unloving, I want you to hear this clearly. Boundaries are one of the deepest forms of love. They say, "I care enough about this relationship to protect what keeps me healthy in it." And when you can hold that truth with steady compassion, You stop choosing between love for yourself and love for others because you've learned they were never in conflict to begin with. Love on its own is not enough to sustain a relationship. That's a hard truth, especially when your heart is deeply invested. You can love someone with everything you have, but if respect is missing, that love begins to drain you instead of filling you. At first, you tell yourself love will carry it. You excuse the dismissive comments. You swallow the constant interruptions. You let the disregard for your feelings slide because you believe love should be patient, love should endure. And while love is patient, it was never meant to be blind. Without respect, love becomes heavy. It asks you to give more than you have and to silence parts of yourself just to keep things going. You start to notice it in the quiet ways first. The sigh you hold in when your opinion gets brushed aside. The loneliness that creeps in even when you're sitting right next to them. The hesitation before speaking, wondering if your words will matter. Over time, that becomes exhaustion. Not because you don't love them, but because love without respect feels like pouring from an empty cup. You're giving energy you can't replenish, and it leaves you questioning your worth. Respect is what gives love its strength. It's what turns affection into partnership. Respect is listening even when it's inconvenient. It's honoring your boundaries even when they don't make sense to the other person. It's valuing your perspective, not because they always agree, but because they recognize you as an equal in the relationship. Without that foundation, love alone starts to feel one-sided, and you find yourself doing mental gymnastics to keep believing that love is enough. The painful reality is that many people stay in relationships far longer than they should because of love. They think walking away means love wasn't real. But here's the truth. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that the relationship is not healthy for you. You can love someone and also acknowledge that respect is missing, and without it, you cannot thrive. That doesn't make your love any less true. It makes your self-worth more clear. When respect is present, you feel it. Conversations don't leave you second guessing. Your needs aren't treated like burdens. You don't have to fight for basic consideration. Love in that environment becomes energizing. It feels safe, steady, and mutual. But when respect is absent, even the most passionate love begins to feel like a weight you carry alone. And if you've been carrying that weight, it's no wonder you feel drained. The turning point comes when you realize respect is not a luxury in love. It's a requirement. And the moment you stop settling for less, you give love the chance to be what it's meant to be, life-giving, not life-draining. Because love with respect will sustain you, grow you, and give you peace. Love without it will empty you until there's nothing left. And you deserve more than empty. You deserve love that honors you. It feels natural to want to keep the people you love happy. You give, you bend, you adjust because you care. But when that pattern becomes constant, when you're the one always shifting, always saying yes, always smoothing things over, it starts to backfire in a way most people don't expect. Over-accommodating doesn't build security in a relationship. It weakens it because while it looks like generosity on the surface, underneath it quietly erodes trust. Here's why trust doesn't come from you always giving people what they want. Trust comes from knowing that what you say is real, that your yes means yes and your no means no. When you over-accommodate, you begin to stretch the truth of yourself. You say you're fine when you're not. You agree to things you don't have the capacity for. You pretend it doesn't bother you, even though it does. And while the other person may not always notice the shift at first, eventually they pick up on it. Something feels off. They sense the distance, the lack of honesty, even if they can't put it into words. Think about it this way. When you constantly put someone else's comfort above your own, you rob them of the chance to know the real you. They end up in a relationship with a version of you that hides resentment behind a smile. And the truth is that that resentment will leak out anyway, through irritation, withdrawal, or passive remarks. Over time, that erodes the very closeness you were trying so hard to protect. You thought accommodating would make them trust you more, but it actually makes them question what's authentic between you. There's another layer here too. When you always give in, you unintentionally teach the other person that your needs don't matter. Not because they're unkind, but because you've trained them not to look for your limits. They start to believe you'll always adjust, and when you finally hit a breaking point, it feels like it comes out of nowhere. That sudden shift can shock the relationship because the foundation wasn't built on honesty. It was built on keeping the peace at any cost. The way back isn't about swinging to the opposite extreme and refusing to bend at all. Healthy relationships require flexibility. But flexibility without honesty is just self-abandonment. The key is learning to speak up in real time with calmness and clarity instead of storing silent resentments that explode later. Saying, I want to help, but I don't have the capacity for that right now, is harder in the moment, but it builds long-term trust. It tells the other person, when I say yes, you can believe me. When I say no, you can trust that too. That consistency is what deepens respect. Over accommodating might feel like love, but love without truth doesn't last. If you want real intimacy, you have to risk being honest about where your limits are. That's how you give the other person the gift of your real self. And that's how trust grows strong, not through constant yeses, but through steady, truthful presence. There's a kind of strength that doesn't raise its voice, doesn't demand, doesn't force its way into the room, and yet people can't ignore it. It's the quiet strength of someone who knows their worth and carries it with steadiness. You can feel it when a person doesn't rush to prove themselves, doesn't scramble for approval, doesn't bend out of shape just to keep someone else happy. That kind of strength commands attention, not because it's loud, but because it's consistent. And in relationships, it changes everything. Most of us have been taught to confuse strength with control. We think being strong means dominating a conversation, shutting the other person down, or always being the one to have the last word. But that's not strength. That's insecurity dressed up as power. Real strength shows up when you can listen without getting defensive, when you can speak the truth calmly, even if your voice shakes, when you can hold a boundary without shutting down your compassion. That quiet steadiness leaves a deeper impact than any outburst ever could. Think about the last time you were around someone who carried themselves that way. They didn't need to argue their value. They didn't need to perform to be noticed. They simply lived from a place of knowing who they are. That presence doesn't just make others respect them. It invites others to rise to that same level of calm and clarity. In a relationship, that kind of strength sets the tone. It says, I don't have to control you to stand firm in me. And when that's the energy in the room, both people feel safer to be honest because one person's steadiness anchors the conversation. The problem is a lot of people mistake quiet strength for weakness. They think if you're not loud, you're not serious. If you're not forceful, you'll get overlooked. But quiet strength isn't passive. It's active restraint. It's knowing you could shout, you could attack, you could manipulate, and choosing not to because you value respect more than winning. That choice is what makes it powerful. Anyone can lose their temper. Not everyone can hold steady when it would be easier to explode. In relationships, this matters because conflict is unavoidable. You're going to disagree, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to feel hurt. The question isn't whether those moments will come. It's how you'll handle them when they do. If you meet tension with panic, defensiveness, or hostility, the connection gets weaker. But if you can meet it with calm honesty, you show that love and respect can exist even in hard conversations. That's the kind of strength that earns trust over time. Quiet strength doesn't mean you're silent or invisible. It means your presence speaks louder than your reaction. It's the difference between demanding respect and living in a way that naturally receives it. And when you begin to carry yourself that way, with steadiness, clarity, and self-respect, you'll notice something powerful. People start paying attention, not because you force them to, but because they can feel you mean what you say, and you're not going to betray yourself to be heard. That's the strength that lasts. Emotional honesty is one of the hardest things to practice in a relationship, but it's also one of the most powerful. It means showing up as you are, not the polished version you think will be accepted, not the watered down version that avoids conflict, but the real version with real feelings. And here's why it matters. When you hide your emotions, you may think you're protecting the relationship, but what you're actually doing is keeping respect from ever taking root. Because lasting respect doesn't grow from perfection, it grows from truth. So many people learn early on that honesty about feelings creates problems. Maybe when you spoke up, you were told you were too sensitive. Maybe when you showed hurt, someone used it against you. Maybe it always led to conflict, so you trained yourself to stay quiet, to mask, to tough it out. It worked in the moment, less tension, less risk, but over time it left you feeling unseen. And in a relationship, feeling unseen is like slow suffocation. You're present, but you're not known. You're loved in theory, but not for who you actually are. That's why emotional honesty matters so much. It's not about dumping every feeling the moment it comes up, and it's not about using your emotions to control the other person. It's about saying, this is what's real for me right now, and trusting that the relationship is strong enough to hold it. When you speak honestly about how you feel, you invite the other person to respect you, not an image of you, not the version you think they want, but you. And when they respond to that honesty with care, it deepens the trust between you. Think about the difference between hearing, nothing's wrong, I'm fine, versus hearing, I'm actually hurt by what you said earlier, and I want us to talk about it. The first keeps the peace in the moment, but builds a wall between you. The second risks conflict, but builds respect. Because the second is real, and even if it's uncomfortable at first, real is what gives a relationship depth. Without it, you're just managing each other, not truly connecting. It takes courage to be emotionally honest because it always carries the risk that the other person won't respond the way you hope. But here's the thing, hiding your emotions doesn't protect you from that risk. It just guarantees you'll stay in a relationship where you're only partially known. And partial knowing can never produce full respect. Respect grows when someone sees your vulnerability and still chooses to treat it with care. That's how bonds get stronger. The beauty of emotional honesty is that it not only teaches the other person how to respect you, it teaches you how to respect yourself. Every time you voice what's real instead of burying it, you remind yourself that your feelings are worthy of space. You stop betraying yourself for temporary peace, and you start creating the kind of peace that lasts, the kind that comes from living in alignment with your truth. And that alignment is what makes a relationship not just survive, but truly thrive.